Requiem has been around for over a decade, and players have been making patches, changes, and complete additional overhauls for nearly as long. One of those overhauls that stands out the most is 3Tweaks, or 3Tweaks, or 3Ftweaks. For the sake of the rest of this video, after the history lesson, I'll be referring to the mod as 3Tweaks. Before the tweaks were 3, they were A to Z. The overhaul that started it all was one called Ftweaks, made by Applesauce in 2017. Another user, a noob in disguise, played Ftweaks, but had his own ideas and changes that he wanted to implement, and so began the creation of 3Tweaks. A NID took a lot of inspiration from Ftweaks, but made 3Tweaks into an overhaul of its own, with one of the biggest changes being the experience-based leveling system. There was another user who assisted a NID with 3Tweaks, and that was Bananaknot. And after a NID stopped updating the mod, Banana created Ftweaks, which was mostly comprised of bug fixes and balance changes. After a while, Banana stopped updating Ftweaks and essentially passed the torch to the now current author of the overhaul, Fornication, or Xper, or Havachot. This guy has a lot of names online, but we just call him Forn. Forn started what you can now imagine to be called Ftweaks to make further balance changes to an already great overhaul. As time went on, Forn started adding more than just balance changes. He added new content such as Daedric Blessings, new weapons, new armors, new enemies, new perk trees, and so much more. This is where the name 3Ftweaks comes from. One of the best parts of Skyrim in general is how customizable your experience can be with modding, and 3Tweaks plays into the same idea. If you like heavy immersion and roleplay, 3Tweaks offers a large variety of build options that can help you produce a backstory while also allowing your character a fair chance at combating the majority of the game's difficulty. If you prefer gameplay and quality of life features, 3Tweaks is packed full of options that will make every playthrough feel more unique, challenging, and rewarding. I think this overhaul has come to the point where it doesn't matter whether you played Requiem first or just jumped straight into 3Tweaks. There will be some applicable knowledge coming from playing Requiem first, but with how many changes this mod makes to the base overhaul of Requiem, it truly has become its own game in a way. If you played Requiem before, you probably remember the learning curve from gameplay changes. An example of what these changes were was how impactful things like stamina management, blessings, Birthsigns, food, and even race choices were. The majority of the changes that Requiem made to vanilla Skyrim to make those choices more meaningful have been built even further upon in 3Tweaks. One of the most useful resources we have for 3Tweaks is this website we are looking at right now. This website is updated from community contributions and may not always have the most exact up-to-date information, but the great majority of it is correct. If you find something that seems off from the website, you can always check in the 3Tweaks Discord channels for updated information. In this section, we are going to cover most of the website as it really does provide a majority of the information about 3Tweaks that you would go looking for. On this front page here, you can find links to the Nexus page and the Discords, as well as links to YouTube channels that have 3Tweaks related content. The economy section here talks about how 3Tweaks offers more of a barter system where merchants don't carry much gold and buying and selling prices are quite bad without leveling and perking into speech. This is designed this way because the majority of gold you end up with is found in the world on enemies or in chests, rather than lugging around copious amounts of junk that merchants would unrealistically buy from you. You can still sell off valuables to merchants for profit, but with their low gold amount, it will require you to purchase some goods from them so they have more gold for you to sell your valuables to them. Alternatively, you can invest levels into speech and put perks in there as well, which will give the merchants more gold and give you better prices. Here you can find all the very specific information about different enemies in the game, so that if you're struggling with a certain enemy type, you can come here and find out what its weaknesses and resistances are. This page shows a general outline of enemy progression, but will vary based off your build and gear. Some general tips for resistant thresholds are for Draugrs. To resist knockdowns from shouts, you'll want to be above 40 magic resist. To avoid the deep freeze paralysis, you'll want to be above 35 frost resist, or have the health rank 2 enchantment, which grants paralysis immunity. For Falmer, to be immune to most poisons and avoid paralysis, you'll want to have 90 poison resist, or once again have the health 2 enchantment. And also be mindful to have MR or magic resist and elemental resist to help versus the Falmer mages, which mostly use frost magic. These thresholds are by no means requirements for fighting these enemies, but will sure help. Here are a handful of mod recommendations, but there will be even more in the video description, so please check that out. Much like almost every aspect of the game, standing stones have been overhauled. Once you select a standing stone, it is locked and you cannot change it unless you use a potion of unclear destiny, which can be made from unknown solvents, which are typically found at the end of guild quest lines. You do start the game with a power that lets you select a standing stone right from the start. The Birthsigns can be as simple as the Steed Stone, adding 50 stamina and 10% movement speed, or as complex as the Atronach Stone, adding spell absorption, cost reduction for spells, 600 points of magicka, but effectively negating your magic regeneration. The Divine and Daedric blessings really start to show how much build variety there is in this mod. You can read through all the different available blessings here, but for an example, you have Debella, which gives 100 armor rating, some armor penetration, and eventually lowers the cost of illusion spells and can even grant immunity to stagger and fall damage if you complete her quest. Then for one of the Daedra, you have Periite, which lowers your disease resistance, but when you contract a disease, you also receive a blessed version of that disease, which gives you a net positive effect. So instead of rattles stunting your stamina regeneration, that actually increases your stamina regeneration. You even get more health, magicka, and stamina for killing Dwemer automations, and you can get the Periite Poisonous Breath, which you get once you get the Spellbreaker shield. Effigies are a new type of item that are a piece of equipment with unique effects. You can find uninfused effigies from the Khajiit caravans, and with a filled Grand Soul Gem you can craft one of these enchanted effigies at the forge. You can only have one equipped at a time, and there are a limited number of effigies that you can make per playthrough. Some of these effects are pretty generic, such as the Abjure, reducing the amount of damage you take when at or near full health, at the cost of slower healing, versus something like the Rogue Effigy, which grants a spell that allows you to convert magicka into stamina. There are no survival mechanics built into 3Tweaks, but utilizing food buffs and getting sleep are important for other reasons. As you can see here, food can be broken down into meals, snacks, and raw food. Meals are your primary food that you will care about. You'll always want a meal that benefits your character. Meals always give 2 of the following 6 effects: health, carry weight, stamina, stamina regeneration, magicka, and magic regeneration. Eating a second meal will only override the original one. Snacks are smaller foods that give negligible benefits for a shorter duration than full meals. Raw food can consist of raw meats or vegetables. These are generally only used as cooking ingredients. Drinks can be broken down into weak alcohol, strong alcohol, and non-alcoholic. Weak alcoholic drinks are similar to meals in that you want one up at all times. You will always give 1 positive effect and 1 negative effect. Positive effects include things like health, stamina regeneration, and magic regeneration. Negative effects include armor rating, stamina regeneration, and movement speed. Strong alcohols override meals and probably won't be used as often. These mostly give massive health bonuses or increased damage. And then the non-alcoholic drinks are primarily used for like outside of combat regeneration. I cannot stress how important food is to your playthrough. I would recommend always to have a food buff that restores stamina per second and use a tonic, which is a potion, to also get some additional stamina recovery. If you're playing a mage build, then the stamina foods are less useful, but you can get great mileage out of other foods like the cheeses or elsewhere fondue. Getting a rested bonus also increases stamina and magic regeneration, so don't forget to sleep. With how unique the racial abilities are, mixed with the distinctive standing stones and blessings, you can really start to see the incredible amount of options and diversity 3Tweaks offers. Altmer still hold the spot for glass cannon, much like in vanilla Requiem, but this time around they have elemental weakness instead, and they have a spell that allows them to convert stamina into magicka, which can make for a very interesting playstyle of a mage that focuses on stamina. Bretons still bolster quite the defense for magic, but can also craft unique foods that make up for their lackluster starting stats, and they have longer lasting spells that plays into the necromancer trope. One of my favorite races in the game, which is what most would consider the best beginner-friendly race, is the Argonian. They start with an additional 100 armor rating, have disease, poison, and shock resistance, but most importantly they regenerate 1 health per second, which is huge for the early game since none of the other races regenerate health naturally. If you couldn't tell by now, 3Tweaks really does touch on everything, including the balance of werewolves and vampires. You can see the buffs and detriments of both supernatures here, but also keep in mind most blessings have restrictions related to the supernatures. You still contract lycanthropy the same way by doing the Companions questline, but you'll probably notice that the Silver Hand aren't such pushovers this time around. As for Sanguinar Vampirus, you can still contract the disease from the Drain Life spell, but no longer from consuming vampire dust. Then there is still the option to join Castle Volkihar, but if you've played Requiem before, you know how strong Lokil is, and if you haven't played before, well, good luck. Lastly, there is a new way to turn to the dark side. When you kill higher level vampires, you have a chance of finding an elixir of blood, which you can use alongside 5 vampire dusts to craft Sanguine's Bane, which you can consume to contract the disease. Pickpocketing was always a skill tree that was kind of hard to justify investing perks into, but 3Tweaks changes that by making it a completely new perk tree called Dexterity. The Dexterity tree primarily enhances your pickpocketing abilities, dual wielding power, unarmed fighting, and even dagger and bow skills. The dual wielding perks can actually unlock your character's movement while power attacking, something you cannot do in the vanilla game. Just ignore the lack of third-person animations. Out of all the mods I've played with, 3Tweaks balances Alchemy the best by far. There is now a toxicity system that will limit the number of active potion effects you can have on at a time. Poisons are very useful and last for many more hits. Many of the less desirable effects, like reducing enemy stamina, have been changed to more impactful effects like lowering the amount of damage the poison target does. But one of the best balance changes 3Tweaks makes to Alchemy was removing the possibility of breaking the game's economy with potion crafting. Any potion or poison you craft will be worth 0 gold. Mix this with the experience-based leveling system and Alchemy is no longer a grind. Just craft the potions and poisons you plan to use and nothing more. Enchanting almost felt like a necessary skill a while back if you were wanting to metagame the best stats and resistances for in-game bosses, but 3Tweaks has added so many unique armors and weapons that cover a wide variety of builds. Enchanting will still be the best for very niche builds that maybe don't have a hand-placed armor or weapon that fits, or maybe you want to use the new infusion perks. Infusions turn your magicka into added damage for your weapons, and as you get more perks or infusions, you can even bypass parts of enemy magic resistance and deal AoE damage. Something that Requiem added to Enchanting is the ability to craft magical staves. It uses the forge to craft them rather than the staff enchanters. 3Tweaks adds more to the staff crafting and even introduced scroll crafting, which you can do by making a scroll crafting kit at any forge. Smithing now has a lot more variety than just crafting gear and tempering it. Weapons and armors have traits, which we'll talk about shortly, but with smithing you can actually add additional weapon traits that you would not normally be able to find in the world. You can make a cushioned steel warhammer so that it's silent and you can play a sneaky barbarian assassin. Or you can add conducting to your silver greatsword so that enemies like dragon priests casting spells take additional damage. Smithing also received new items that can be crafted called Master Keys, which are one-time use keys to unlock locks of specific difficulty up to expert level. Lastly, a new mechanic added to smithing is called Augmentation. You can read this section here to get the full information, but basically it's a way for smiths to take advantage of enchanted gear that they find in the world without having to invest in enchanting. Of course, it won't be as strong as enchanting, but it will still make for great versatility. Armor rating calculations are made very simple in 3Tweaks. Every 10 points of armor is 1% damage reduction. Therefore, 800 armor rating equates to 80% damage reduction. However, there is such thing as armor penetration, which the player character and NPCs can utilize to bypass parts of armor. Armor penetration sources range from perks to enchantments to blessings and more. The damage cap reduction is 80%, and the armor penetration cap is also 80%. You can see your current armor penetration stat in the Requiem skill MCM menu. The number reflected there is how much your power attacks utilize. Normal attacks only utilize half of that number. Light armor is named evasion. As the name implies, you're not looking to take hits while wearing light armor. In fact, there is a perk in evasion that gives you a dodge ability. Rather than having a fancy animation for this dodge, all it really is a quick burst of movement speed that allows you to get out of the way of attacks, and it is very strong. The other evasion perks are designed to help reduce stamina consumption and increase your damage output. Heavy armor offers much more protection as you might expect at the cost of movement speed. One of the hardest parts of playing heavy armor early on is how much it lowers your movement speed and increases your stamina consumption. Some of the ways to mitigate this would be to use the Steed Stone for stamina and movement speed, or play as a Red Guard, which have good stamina management and additional movement speed as well. Wearing 4 pieces of heavy armor actually reduces the damage taken from range attacks by 15%, which is huge considering how hard enemy archers are early on. Heavy armor also increases your mass a considerable amount, which allows you to more reliably bull rush enemies. Bull rushing happens when your mass is higher than the target's, and after you have sprinted for a few moments, running into the target can either stun them or completely knock them down. Similar to the dodge perk and evasion, heavy armor has a perk that makes you take 50% less damage while sprinting. So to me, this is kind of like a dodge perk, in the sense that you can start sprinting before you get hit to mitigate a lot of the damage you would take. This also means you're taking less damage while bull rushing enemies. Both light and heavy armor have traits like I mentioned before. You can take a look at the armor traits tab on this page to see all of them. They range from effects like magic resistance to lowering costs of spells and even increasing damage dealt. Weapons, much like armors, also have their own traits, which you can see here. Requiem added a handful of new weapon types a while back, like katanas and quarterstaves. Some unique weapons may have additional traits tied to them that you can see when you look in your active effects tab. Since Requiem and 3Tweaks both make changes to weapon, attack speed, and ranges, I would highly recommend testing each weapon type on a training dummy to get a feel for the speed and the range. Keep in mind that steel weapons trait actually gives it longer reach than other materials of the same weapon type. On the armor and weapons page, you can see a tab for new armor and new weapons. If you don't mind spoilers, you can check those out, but they are only items that are added by 3Tweaks, not ones added by Requiem. The combat section under System Mechanics provides a lot of useful information about the main changes 3Tweaks makes to the combat gameplay mechanics. When you are low on health or stamina, you will move slower, attack slower, and even regenerate stamina slower. Blocking now protects you from poisons and minor knockdown effects, as well as blocking with a shield will reduce incoming range damage by 15% and spell and shout magnitude by 40%, and that's all without perks. Being invisible actually increases your non-sneak attack damage and mitigates some of the damage that you would take from enemy attacks. One of the hardest enemies to overcome early on for newer players is archers. 3Tweaks does a lot to balance early game archers though. If you have the first perk in either one-handed or two-handed, you can break low-tier bows and crossbows when hitting an archer. Those low-tier bows also do a considerably less amount of damage to the player. 3Tweaks also gives all races a starting health bonus of 30 points to help reduce the chance of getting one shot early on, and all races gain an additional 2 points of health and 0.3 points of magic resist each time they level up until level 21, equaling out to an extra 40 health and 6 magic resist for all characters. Stamina is basically your second health bar. More actions will require stamina now, but there are a lot of ways to better your stamina in the ways of food, potions, and gear. Spell cost reduction, magic resist, elemental resist, and poison resist have now all been capped to 75%. But for poison resist, being at 90% can also make you immune to some poison attacks like Charis Spit. Getting hit not only damages your health, but will also drain your magicka and stamina as well now. Disease resist enchantments can reduce the amount you lose when hit. and there are also perks that can help reduce this amount as well. Nords do not lose magicka or stamina on hit, and Bretons actually gain a small amount of magicka when they get hit. The one thing that will likely make or break this mod for most players is the experience-based leveling system. In vanilla Skyrim, you level your skills by using them, which makes logical sense but can lead to less than fun, grindy gameplay. 3Tweaks changes that by implementing experience points, in the form of insight potions, which can be found from killing enemies, looting chests, and even quest rewards. Your character will have a power in the spell menu called Increase Skill. When you activate this power, you will automatically consume the insight potions, which you can then use to level whichever skills you see fit. This is the part where you, the player, will have to dictate how you want your gameplay experience to be. If you are more into the heavy roleplay style, you might want to only put levels into the skills that you have actually been using. Whereas if you are more interested in progressing the game in a faster pace, you can select exactly what skills you want to level first to help your character prepare for the next challenges in their journey. The leveling system is what you make of it. The majority of games nowadays use experience-based leveling systems, including games like Fallout. The way the insight potions and skill points work is slightly outdated on the website description. If you leave the MCM options as default, then your skill will require a number of skill points equal to the skill level. So if your block stat is at 15, it will require 15 skill points to level it up to 16. You will receive 30 skill points for 1 insight potion regular, and 3 skill points for 1 insight potion diluted. The diluted insights are typically found when killing enemies like wolves or bandits. The regular insights can also be found when killing enemies, but are far less likely. You will see these in chests and as quest rewards. Once you get a skill to level 50, you will probably notice that your skill points are no longer working for that skill. That's because to level past 50, you will need greater insights, which are essentially a way to make the player move on to more difficult content in order to get stronger, rather than allowing players to grind to godhood on low-level enemies. One thing to note, in this video you will see my increased skill menu may look a little different than yours. That is because I am using a mod that overhauls the interface, making it more efficient and beginner friendly. So check out the recommended mod section in the description. The first thing to do before you enter combat is to check your buffs. For food, you can have a main course, a snack, and a weak alcohol active, or just a strong alcohol. For the most part, I would recommend at the very least having a main course, but snacks and weak alcohols can still help a lot, especially early on. For potions, since 3Tweaks has the toxicity system, you have to be careful with how many potions you have active at a time. Early on, I will always have a tonic of stamina running, as it makes a big difference for stamina recovery. For most of the harder bandit content, like Silent Moon's Camp or Orotheim, I also like to use Fortify health potions when I come across them. Resist potions are typically used for specific encounters. Like if you're going to fight Falmer, you may want to use 2 of your potion slots for resists. If you're playing a build that utilizes a school of magic with buff spells, make sure you take advantage of those as well. Illusion has a spell that decreases range damage taken, Alteration has armor spells, and Restoration has health regeneration spells as examples. Part of the preparation is knowing what you're getting into. If you like to just jump into the fray and figure it out as you go, that is definitely one way to learn. But if you take the time to scout out the fight ahead, you might see an archer in an area that you didn't know there was one, and maybe now you can pick them off before fighting the melee enemies out in the open. If you are playing a mage and you see there are a handful of Dunmer to fight, you might want to use something other than fire magic, as it would be less effective against them. Knowing where enemies are and what you are fighting will help you come up with a plan of action and make it more likely that you survive the fight. Now that we have finally made contact with the enemy and we are fighting one-on-one, we need to consider our spacing in relation to the enemy. I like to stay at a specific range that invites them to do a forward power attack, but where I still have enough space to dodge the attack and punish. If you are too close to the enemy, it can be difficult to get out of their power attack range. If you cannot dodge away, sometimes it's best to dodge into the attack. Against enemies with shields, they often turtle up, making it hard to punish their openings. Some options here are running past them and attacking from behind, baiting their power attacks since they're easier to punish, Or if you have the stamina for it, power attacking their shield and following up with a strike while they're staggered can work too. Archers can be a pain, especially in open areas. Closing the distance safely using terrain and bursting them down is a strong strategy, or you can play it extra safe and run them out of arrows by dodging them by strafing. Tricksters are bandits that make use of scrolls and staves. These enemies can be quite difficult early on as you likely don't have much in the way of magical defense. These enemies can be handled similarly as archers. Fighting one-on-one is not so challenging, but what happens when you aggro the whole camp? Fighting multiple enemies at once can sometimes feel impossible, but this is where spacing and terrain come into play. Angle strafing, which is moving backwards in diagonal directions, is faster than moving directly backwards and can help you gain the distance you need in those tense moments. When one bandit lunges forward for a power attack, you have to keep an eye on the distance of the others behind him before you commit to an attack. Using terrain to separate enemies is a strong tactic when fighting groups. Depending on your build, you can also use AoE attacks, summons from spells or scrolls, or used range attacks to pick off groups before engaging in melee combat. Another tactic that is especially effective when wearing heavy armor is bull rushing. You can potentially knock down a whole group of enemies, take one out while they're down, and then run away to do it again. Some of the better starting locations are Riften, Riverwood, Falkreath, and Solitude. Riften has the Ratway with some early game enemies and decent loot. There are also some early game quests like the Skooma quest or the Frost quest. Riverwood, or the classic camping in the woods start as you see most YouTubers do, might not be the easiest starting location when you start off fighting 3 bandits out in the open, but the area has a lot to give. There are a ton of mud crabs, slaughterfish, and wolves that you can kill early for XP, and if you manage to clear the 3 bandit camp, you get the treasure map 1. There's Embershard Mine, which is a nice early game cave with good pacing, and it leads you into Whiterun, which has a handful of good early game locations as well. Falkreath is very similar to the Riverwood start, being that they're very close, but there are a couple Falkreath locations that are good to start off with, like Bannermist Tower. Solitude is not as well known of a good start, as I would consider this more challenging than others, but it still holds a few good early locations, like Ironback Hideout, Orphan's Tier, the Dainty Slode, and even Wolfskull Cave if you go there before talking to Falk Firebeard. If you still struggle on getting off the ground from level 1, I am planning to do a 3-part beginners build series showcasing a recommended starting path for 3 different builds like Warrior, Mage, and Archer. I have a handful of past streams and recorded series of builds I have played that you can watch to learn from, as well as many other content creators that are linked on the homepage of the website that you can watch. In this video's description, you will find a lot of information. There will be links to the website I have mentioned previously, the mod page where you can download 3Tweaks, other mods that I would suggest adding, names of Wabbajack mod lists that are currently using 3Tweaks, as well as links to the Requiem discords that have 3Tweaks channels for support and discussion. I encourage you to give this overhaul a try and reach out to the community for support and feedback, but be warned, it will be hard to play Skyrim any other way once you get addicted to 3Tweaks.